The Velarth had no reason to attack the human colony of New Eden. It wasn't a strategic location, nor was it a threat to their empire. It was simply a peaceful settlement, home to families seeking a quiet life far from the political tensions of the galaxy. But for the Velarth, it was an easy target. Their expansionist ambitions cared nothing for the lives they destroyed along the way. The colony was nothing more than a symbol of weakness, an obstacle to be cleared. And so, they descended upon New Eden with a fury and brutality that no one had expected. The first signs of the attack came in the early morning, the skies darkening with the arrival of Velarth warships. At first, the colonists didn't understand what was happening. New Eden was a place of peace, a community built on cooperation and mutual support. The idea of being attacked, of being targeted by a hostile force, seemed impossible. But the reality of the situation hit them all too quickly. Within moments, the peaceful world they had built was thrown into chaos as the Velarth unleashed their full military force on the defenseless colony. There was no warning, no communication, no offer of surrender. The Velarth had no interest in negotiation. Their goal was simple: destruction. Homes were obliterated in seconds, families torn apart as the Velarth troops descended from their ships, slaughtering anyone in their path. The air was filled with the sounds of destruction, the screams of those who couldn't escape in time. The Velarth showed no mercy, indiscriminately killing men, women, and children alike. They took pleasure in the chaos, in the fear they instilled. It was not just a massacre, it was a message, a brutal display of their dominance. For the people of New Eden, the attack was incomprehensible. This was their home, a place where they had built their lives, where their children played in the streets, and where they had believed they were safe. Now, all of that was being ripped away in an instant. Families tried to flee, gathering what little they could and running for the emergency shuttles, but the Velarth cut them down before they could even reach safety. The few ships that did manage to escape the planet carried with them the shattered remnants of what was once a thriving community, a handful of survivors who had witnessed the destruction of everything they held dear. By the end of the attack, New Eden was nothing more than rubble and ash. The Velarth had left no stone unturned, ensuring that no one remained alive to tell the tale of what had happened. But they had made a mistake. A small group of survivors, hidden deep in the mountains, had witnessed the slaughter from afar. These few, huddled together in the wreckage of their former lives, would become the spark that would ignite a fury unlike anything the Velarth had ever seen. The survivors were not military personnel. They were farmers, teachers, doctors, ordinary people who had come to New Eden to escape the conflicts of the galaxy. But the Velarth had taken everything from them. They had not just destroyed buildings and infrastructure, they had ripped apart families, killed children in front of their parents, and left a scar on the hearts of those who had lived through the massacre. What the Velarth didn't understand was that they hadn't just killed people, they had slaughtered a family, a community that was bound together by something stronger than blood. The survivors were scattered, lost in their grief, but something darker began to stir within them. At first, it was disbelief, the shock of what they had seen. But soon that shock turned to anger, and anger gave way to something far more powerful, a burning desire for revenge. They couldn't bring back the people they had lost, but they could make the Velarth pay for what they had done. This wasn't about politics or territory anymore. This was personal. The Velarth had assumed that humanity would cower in fear after such a brutal display. They expected the survivors to run, to hide, to beg for mercy. But they had miscalculated. Humanity's strength didn't come from their technology or their military might. It came from their ability to bond, to form connections that transcended mere survival. The Velarth had killed their families, and in doing so, they had unleashed a force they couldn't begin to understand. Among the survivors were people who had once served in Earth's military, retired soldiers who had settled in New Eden for a peaceful life. Now, these men and women found themselves called back into action, not by duty but by the sheer need to avenge what had been taken from them. They began to organize, reaching out to human colonies across the galaxy, sharing their story, and rallying support for what was to come. This wasn't about rebuilding New Eden anymore. The survivors didn't want to rebuild, they wanted to destroy. The human government, shocked by the brutality of the Valarth attack, initially sought a diplomatic solution. Messages were sent to the Valarth leadership, demanding answers, calling for peace talks, but the Valarth ignored them. They believed humanity was too weak to respond with force, too scattered and unorganized to pose a real threat. In their arrogance, the Valarth made a critical error. They assumed that their show of strength had cowed the humans into submission, but in reality, it had done the opposite. The survivors, now scattered across human space, were done with diplomacy. They knew that the Valarth wouldn't stop with New Eden, that this was just the beginning of a larger campaign. And so, they decided to strike first. They would not wait for the Valarth to come for them again. They would take the fight to the Valarth's doorstep, and they would not stop until the entire planet had paid for the blood spilled on New Eden. The plans for revenge began to take shape. It wasn't just about retaliating, it was about complete and total annihilation. The Valarth had taken everything from them, and now the humans would return the favor. They didn't just want to defeat the Valarth, they wanted to erase them, to wipe their entire civilization from existence just as the Valarth had done to their family. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about erasing the Valarth, so they could never hurt anyone again. The survivors, fueled by their grief and anger, began to gather resources, reaching out to other colonies for support. Scientists, engineers, and military strategists all came together with one goal in mind: the total destruction of the Valarth homeworld. It wasn't just about taking out their military, it was about ensuring that nothing was left. The Valarth would know what it meant to face true vengeance. They had started this war. Now, the humans were going to finish it. The survivors had no illusions about the task ahead. Destroying the Valarth wasn't going to be easy. Their homeworld was heavily fortified, surrounded by a fleet that had crushed countless enemies before. But the survivors of New Eden didn't care about the odds. They were no longer concerned with whether it was possible or impossible. They were driven by a single, burning desire for retribution, and they were willing to do whatever it took to see the Valarth erased from existence. Among the survivors were some of the brightest minds humanity had to offer: engineers, scientists, and former military personnel who had the knowledge and skills needed to put together a plan. They knew that a conventional attack on the Valarth would be futile. The Valarth had a technological edge, and their military was vastly superior. But the humans weren't planning a conventional attack. They were planning something far more devastating, something that would ensure that the Valarth wouldn't just be defeated, but wiped from the galaxy entirely. The first step was gathering the necessary resources. The survivors reached out to other human colonies, sharing their story and rallying support. It didn't take much convincing. The massacre of New Eden had sent shockwaves through human-controlled space, and the survivors' message was clear: the Valarth wouldn't stop with one colony. They were a threat to all of humanity, and if they weren't dealt with now, the rest of the human settlements would be next. With the support of other colonies, the survivors began to assemble a team. This wasn't going to be a traditional military operation, and they didn't need an army. They needed people who could think outside the box, people who could take the resources available and turn them into something capable of destroying an entire planet. The survivors had no interest in half measures or small victories. They wanted total annihilation. They wanted to make sure that the Valarth never threatened anyone again. The plan they developed was as audacious as it was terrifying. They would create a weapon capable of destabilizing the Valarth's home planet, something that would tear it apart from the inside. This wasn't about sending ships or launching an invasion. It was about engineering the complete destruction of the Valarth civilization in one catastrophic blow. The key to their plan was exploiting the Valarth's arrogance. The Valarth had made it clear that they didn't consider humanity a real threat, which meant they wouldn't expect an attack of this scale. The humans knew they had one advantage: the Valarth would underestimate them, just as they had during the massacre of New Eden. That underestimation would be their undoing. Human scientists and engineers began working around the clock, designing a weapon that could achieve the level of destruction they needed. The weapon they envisioned was not a conventional bomb or missile, it was something far more insidious. The idea was to create a device that could destabilize the planet's core, causing massive tectonic shifts that would eventually rip the planet apart. It wouldn't happen all at once. It would start slowly, giving the Valar just enough time to realize what was happening but not enough time to stop it. As the scientists worked on the weapon, the survivors turned their attention to the logistics of the plan. They needed a way to get the weapon to the Valarth homeworld without being detected. The Valarth's planetary defenses were formidable, and any direct assault would be suicide. But the survivors had a plan for that as well. They would disguise their approach as a diplomatic mission, using the Valarth's disdain for humanity to their advantage. The Valarth believed that the humans had been broken by the massacre of New Eden, that they would come begging for peace. The survivors decided to let the Valarth believe that. They sent a message to the Valarth leadership, proposing negotiations. The Valarth, arrogant and certain of their superiority, agreed to meet. They saw no threat in allowing the humans to approach. After all, the humans had no real military power, and the Valarth were confident that any diplomatic mission would end with humanity groveling at their feet. This was exactly what the survivors had counted on. While the Valarth prepared for what they believed would be a simple negotiation, the humans quietly prepared their weapon, hiding it within the diplomatic shuttle that would be sent to the Valarth homeworld. The plan was simple. The shuttle would land, the weapon would be deployed, and then the humans would leave before the Valarth even realized what had happened. As the final preparations were made, the survivors wrestled with the moral implications of their plan. They knew what they were about to do was not just a military strike, it was genocide. They weren't just targeting the Valarth military, they were targeting civilians, families, children. The very thought of wiping out an entire planet weighed heavily on them. But the images of New Eden, of the families slaughtered and the homes burned, hardened their resolve. The Valarth hadn't shown mercy, and they wouldn't get any in return. The human leadership, faced with the decision of whether to endorse the survivors' plan, struggled with the enormity of the act. There were calls for restraint, for a more measured response, but those voices were drowned out by the survivors who had lived through the massacre. Their voices were filled with rage, grief, and the need for justice. They made it clear that the Valarth didn't deserve a second chance. They had forfeited that right when they destroyed New Eden. The human government ultimately gave their approval. They knew that the Valarth represented a clear and present danger, not just to the survivors, but to all of humanity. And they understood that the survivors' thirst for revenge wasn't just about payback. It was about ensuring that no other human colony would suffer the same fate. The Valarth had to be erased, and this plan was the only way to guarantee that. With everything in place, the survivors boarded the diplomatic shuttle, their weapon hidden and ready. They knew that what they were about to do would change the galaxy forever. They weren't just going to war, they were about to commit an act of vengeance so total, so final, that it would send a message to every species in the galaxy. Humanity would not be trifled with. The Valarth had slaughtered their family, and now humanity would erase their entire world. The shuttle left human space and set its course for the Valarth homeworld. The Valarth had no idea what was coming. They believed they were about to assert their dominance over a broken, defeated species. But the survivors of New Eden knew differently. They knew that they were about to bring an end to the Valarth in a way that would be remembered for generations. As they approached the Valarth planet, the survivors remained calm, their faces set with grim determination. They had already lost everything, and now they were about to take everything from the Valarth in return. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back. The shuttle glided silently toward the Valarth homeworld, passing through their planetary defenses with ease. The Valarth, arrogant in their belief that humanity posed no real threat, had allowed the diplomatic mission to proceed without suspicion. They believed the humans were coming to grovel, to beg for mercy in the face of the overwhelming destruction they had unleashed on New Eden. The Valarth leadership had no reason to doubt this narrative. They had crushed countless species before, each time receiving the same result: submission. What they did not know was that the humans on board had no intention of negotiating. As the shuttle approached the surface, the tension among the survivors was palpable. They were about to commit an act that would change the course of human history, a strike not just against an enemy's military but against their very civilization. The Velarth had brought this upon themselves, and now they would pay for their arrogance. The weapon, hidden within the shuttle, was primed and ready, designed to be deployed the moment the shuttle reached the surface. The plan was simple in its execution but devastating in its outcome. The weapon would be activated in a critical location on the Velarth homeworld, a place where it would do the most damage to the planet's stability. The device was built not to explode outward but to destabilize the very core of the planet, triggering a chain reaction that would eventually tear it apart from within. The humans would leave before the effects became noticeable, giving the Velarth just enough time to realize their fate before their world crumbled beneath them. The shuttle landed, and the Velarth welcomed the humans with a mixture of disdain and superiority. They believed this was the moment of humanity's capitulation, the moment where they would finally assert their dominance over the species that had dared to exist within their territory. But the humans played their part well, masking their true intentions behind a facade of diplomacy. Every second counted now. They had to execute the plan perfectly, leaving no room for error. As the weapon was discreetly deployed, the humans remained outwardly calm, their thoughts focused on the task at hand. This wasn't about revenge in the heat of battle. It was about ensuring that the Velarth's reign of terror ended here, now, and forever. The countdown began the moment the weapon was activated, its effects slow but irreversible. It would start deep within the planet, a gradual disruption of the core that would build over hours, eventually reaching a tipping point where the entire world would collapse in on itself. The Velarth leadership had no idea what was happening. They continued with their pretense of superiority, oblivious to the fact that their planet's destruction was already underway. For the humans, every second spent among the Velarth was a test of patience. They had to wait, knowing that their mission was already a success, but also knowing that they needed to leave before the Velarth caught on. The weapon would not cause an immediate catastrophe. It was a slow, calculated unraveling of the planet's stability, giving the humans ample time to make their exit before the real damage began. As the shuttle prepared to depart, the humans remained composed, exchanging polite words with their Velarth hosts, who still believed they were in control. It wasn't until the shuttle had safely left the atmosphere that the humans allowed themselves to feel the weight of what they had done. They had just condemned an entire planet, an entire species, to extinction. There would be no coming back from this, no reversing the chain reaction that had already begun deep within the Velarth homeworld. Hours passed before the first signs of the planet's destabilization became apparent. It started with subtle tremors, barely noticeable at first, but quickly escalating into something far more destructive. Velarth scientists scrambled to understand what was happening, but by the time they realized the scope of the catastrophe, it was too late. The core of the planet had begun to collapse, and with it, the foundations of their civilization were crumbling. Panic spread across the planet as the Velarth realized the magnitude of the disaster. Their once impenetrable world, the heart of their empire, was falling apart. Entire cities began to collapse as the ground gave way, swallowed by the instability deep below the surface. The Velarth military, so confident in their ability to crush any threat, was powerless to stop the destruction. Their advanced technology, their mighty fleets, none of it could save them now. The humans, watching from afar, knew the moment had come. They had done what they set out to do. The Velarth, who had slaughtered their family, would now face the same fate. Their world was being erased, just as New Eden had been erased. But this wasn't just an act of vengeance, it was a message to the galaxy. Humanity would not be preyed upon. They would not bow to those who sought to destroy them. The Velarth had underestimated humanity, and now they were paying the ultimate price. As the planet continued its slow collapse, the Velarth leadership tried desperately to organize a response. Evacuations were attempted, but the destruction was too widespread, too fast. There was no time to save anyone. The Velarth had ruled through fear and domination, believing that their power made them invincible. Now they were learning the harshest lesson of all: no empire, no matter how powerful, could survive when its enemies were willing to do whatever it took to bring it down. The planet's surface began to fracture, massive fissures opening up as the core destabilized further. Entire continents broke apart, swallowed by the void as the planet's structural integrity collapsed. The Valar were left with nothing but despair as they watched their world die, helpless to stop the destruction that was now inevitable. Their fleets, their armies, their cities, everything was being consumed by the very ground beneath them. The survivors of New Eden had achieved their goal. The Valar, who had destroyed their family, were now being erased from existence. The humans had not just fought back, they had ensured that the Valar would never threaten anyone again. It was a victory, but it was also a somber one. The cost had been immense, not just in lives lost, but in the moral weight of what had been done. The humans had committed an act of genocide, wiping out an entire species in response to the massacre of their own people. As the Valar homeworld finally broke apart, collapsing into the void, the survivors of New Eden could only watch. Their revenge was complete, but it came with a heavy price. They had done what they believed was necessary, but the gravity of their actions weighed heavily on them. They had erased a planet, an entire civilization, because of the pain they had endured. The Valar had deserved it, there was no doubt about that. But the act of total annihilation left them with more than just a sense of justice. It left them with the knowledge that they had become something else in the process. The Valar had slaughtered their family, and so the humans had erased their entire planet. The galaxy would remember this day, not just for the destruction of the Valar, but for the message it sent to every other species that might consider crossing humanity. The Valar were gone. Their planet, their people, their legacy, erased in the span of hours. What had once been a thriving, expansionist empire was now nothing more than debris floating in space. The humans had done it. They had not just defeated their enemies, they had wiped them out entirely. The Valar's arrogance, their cruelty, their belief that they could slaughter humans without consequence had led to their downfall, and now there was nothing left of them but memories. For the survivors of New Eden, the victory was bittersweet. They had avenged their families, their community, their home, but the cost was heavier than they had anticipated. They had committed an act that few species in the galaxy would ever dare to, wiping out an entire planet, ensuring that the Valar line would end with them. It was justice in the purest sense, but it was also genocide, and the weight of that reality settled on them as the last fragments of the Valar world disappeared into the void. In the hours and days that followed, the survivors returned to human space, but they were no longer the same people who had once lived in peace on New Eden. They had become something different, something darker. The rage and grief that had driven them to destroy the Valar had been sated, but now they had to confront what they had done. They had erased a planet in response to their own suffering, and while the Valar had deserved it, the question of whether it had been the right thing to do lingered in the minds of many. Humanity as a whole was left to grapple with the consequences. News of the Valar's destruction spread quickly throughout human space, and while there was celebration in some quarters, particularly among those who had lost loved ones in the Valar's previous attacks, there was also unease. The annihilation of an entire species wasn't something that could be taken lightly, and it left many wondering what kind of message humanity had sent to the rest of the galaxy. The survivors of New Eden were hailed as heroes by some, but they were also questioned by others. Had they gone too far? Was it truly necessary to wipe out the Valar entirely? Some argued that the Valar had made their bed and deserved what they got. After all, they had shown no mercy, and they had slaughtered innocent civilians without hesitation. But others worried about the precedent that had been set. What would stop humanity from doing the same to another species if they felt provoked? What did it mean that humanity now had the capacity and willingness to erase entire planets? The galaxy, too, took notice. Word of the Valar's annihilation spread quickly to other alien races, and the reaction was one of both fear and respect. The humans had shown that they were not to be trifled with, that they were capable of responding to aggression with overwhelming force. Species that had once seen humanity as peaceful explorers, diplomats, and traders now saw them as something far more dangerous. The Valar had underestimated humanity, and they had paid the price. No one in the galaxy wanted to make that same mistake. But with that respect came a certain wariness. humanity had shown that they were willing to cross a line that few others would dare to cross. The erasure of the Valar was a statement, one that would echo throughout the galaxy for generations to come. It was clear now that humanity wasn't just a species of peacekeepers. They were capable of extreme violence, capable of turning their grief and anger into a weapon that could destroy entire worlds. The survivors, for their part, struggled to return to their lives. The destruction of the Valar had given them closure, but it had also changed them in ways they hadn't fully anticipated. They had lost their families, their homes, and their sense of safety, and in response, they had wiped out an entire species. Some found solace in that fact, believing that they had done what was necessary to protect humanity from further attacks. Others, however, were haunted by what they had become. They had wanted revenge, and they had gotten it, but at what cost to their own humanity? For those who had spearheaded the plan, the realization that they had wiped out not just soldiers but civilians, families, and children weighed heavily on them. They had justified it in the heat of the moment, driven by the memories of New Eden, by the desire to make the Valar pay for the lives they had taken. But now, in the quiet aftermath, they couldn't escape the knowledge that they had become executioners on a scale they had never imagined. The Valar had slaughtered their family, but in response, the humans had erased theirs. As time passed, the galaxy continued to process the fallout from the Valar's destruction. For some, it served as a warning: don't provoke humanity, or you might face the same fate as the Valar. For others, it was a moment of fear. If humanity was willing to go that far, what else were they capable of? What kind of future did the galaxy face now that humanity had shown its hand? In the halls of human government, the debate raged on. Some argued that the destruction of the Valar had been necessary, that it had prevented further bloodshed and ensured the safety of human colonies across the galaxy. Others, however, raised concerns about what this act meant for humanity's future. Had they set a dangerous precedent? Had they opened the door to more extreme measures in future conflicts? Could humanity still claim to be a force for peace when they had just erased an entire species? The survivors of New Eden, though scattered, remained connected by their shared experience. They had avenged their families, but they knew that they could never return to the lives they had once lived. The destruction of the Valar had given them closure, but it had also left them with questions that might never be answered. They had sought justice, but the justice they had delivered had come at a cost they hadn't fully understood until it was too late. In the end, the story of New Eden and the Valar became a cautionary tale throughout the galaxy. It was a story of grief, of rage, and of retribution on a scale that few could comprehend. Humanity had proven that they were not to be underestimated, that they could be just as ruthless and destructive as any species when pushed to the edge. But they had also shown that such power came with consequences, consequences that would shape the future of humanity and the galaxy alike. The Valar had slaughtered their family, so the humans had erased their planet. And now, both humanity and the galaxy would live with the knowledge of what had been done, and the fear of what might come next.